Okay, I'm just going to put up our antitrust policy notice. As always, there are more details available on our website. I'm sharing my screen, so you should be able to see this clearly. If you have any questions, you can contact our counsel, Andrew Updegrove, to address those. We always show the antitrust policy notice at the beginning of meetings. Now, moving on to our agenda today, we have about 20 slides in total, so it's quite full. What we're going to do today is have a bit of an information download of what occurred in 2019, what happened at the very end of the year that you may have missed, and what's coming up next. But to get started, let's have the roll call. So I see Hans, Klaus, Nicole, Andrew Katz, Mark Giese, Russ Ealing, Alex, and Balakrishna on the line. Have I missed anyone? Alrighty. So welcome everyone. The project had a really busy 2019. We touched on this in the partner call a few minutes ago. We had three key strategic items we wanted to cover going into 2019. These were items that the OpenChain Governing Board put as high priority. So increasing the size of the community of conformance, increasing the size of our partner program, and building out our activities in China, Japan, Korea, plus India. So we're pretty happy with the results. We increased the community of conformance from 20 to 35 entities, and we expect to have a few more announcements shortly. The partner program has more than doubled to 21 entities, and we also expect to have a few more announcements on that front shortly too. And we have work groups active in China, Japan, Korea, India, and also Taiwan, so we're very happy with the geographic growth there. We will be launching work groups in Europe and North America. In fact, Oliver from Siemens has given us space on the 6th of February in Nuremberg to host the first OpenChain Germany work group. I'll be advertising that later this week, and I hope that some of you will be able to attend or dial in. We'll probably be starting in Silicon Valley in America sometime in March. So at the moment, we have several hundred companies actively engaged with the OpenChain project. We're very happy with the way that we've built out not only partnerships with smaller firms, but also with very large firms around the world. And we've made significant progress on our ISO preparation. We launched two global work groups in 2019, the automotive work group and the tooling work group. Both of those are from summer. In fact, the automotive work group, some of the key figures are in Las Vegas right now, and they'll be showcasing the OpenChain project at CES. Russ, will you be dropping by the event?
I will be. I'll be there tomorrow through Thursday night.
Fantastic. I know Endo-san from Toyota will be there and a few other people from Toyota Motor Group. Looking forward to hearing how it went. I know that there's all kinds of stuff been arranged. There's monitors, there's badges, there's cards, I think there's t-shirts. So it sounds like it'll be exciting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
So just out of scale, Russ, have you been to CES a few times before? It's not an event I've personally attended.
I have. Yeah, I have.
What kind of foot traffic, just wild ballpark, do you think we could expect?
Around 200,000, I believe.
Okay, that's a lot. We're probably going to run out of business cards.
Well, I mean, so don't forget, there's several. So like it's at the Las Vegas Convention Center. I think our booth is at the Westgate Hotel, which is right next door. There's a bunch of other hotels, casinos, and hotels in the area that also host. Like you'll find like the smart home area, and like different technologies can end up in different parts of the Las Vegas Strip area. But in total, I believe this year they're expecting near 200,000.
It's a remarkable event, and we owe a great debt to Automotive Grade Linux for lending us a little bit of their booth area at a very, very reasonable price. Otherwise, of course, the OpenChain project wouldn't be able to afford going to CES. So thank you, Russ, for being a volunteer and assisting there. And, thanks to Endo-san and his team as well. They're not on this call, obviously. It's 2 a.m. here in Japan, but they'll probably be watching the recording. And certainly I'm looking forward to hearing how it went. The tooling work group is also quite busy. They've been meeting on a regular 2-week schedule. And essentially, the alignment between German and Japanese companies appears to be accelerating. And we recently, at the Open Compliance Summit, saw that companies in Korea and China are also working on the same tools. So it looks like we're going to have significant interaction in the tooling group in 2020. Exciting stuff. Just with regards to size, the automotive and tooling groups are well north of 100 each, so quite a few people involved. Okay, at the moment we've got 2 global third-party certifiers in the OpenChain project, so PwC and TÜVSUD, and of course we're going to be actively talking with other certification authorities about what they can do in offering OpenChain certification. As we head into ISO, we want to make sure that there's plenty of support for those who want full third-party certification. That's adjacent to other things. Self-certification is always the heart of the project. And then there's the intermediate independent compliance assessment, where a consultancy or law firm or certifier just has a look at how you're self-certified and maybe makes a few suggestions. We're quite happy with that portfolio of options. It's all in direct response to market demand. So as usual, user companies are driving this, and we're pretty happy with where it'll go in 2020. ISO, we're on track. So I've got the paperwork on my desktop right now. Joint Development Foundation is a pass submitter, and I'm just filling out the OpenChain pass submission paperwork. As discussed before, will be a formal standard, or we expect to be a formal standard, first half 2020. If all goes well, we could be an ISO standard as early as April. Just a snapshot of what's been happening in terms of our work groups. The Japanese work group has continued to grow, so we're looking at about 72 companies now and over 170 active participants. We had a nice year of activity in Korea with 4 meetings hosted by LG, Samsung, SK Telecom, and Korea Telecom. The next meeting in Korea, I think, is being hosted by Kakao, so we're very happy with the engagement there. And just like in Japan, we've seen significant interest from infrastructure and automotive as well as telecoms. India just got its first 2 meetings done. We're delighted to see that in place, and it seems that everyone in our Indian community is just so enthusiastic and full of energy. This is a very exciting coverage. And of course, we're in China as well. We've hosted a couple of meetings in China, and big credit to people who've been helping us in Shenzhen and Beijing. We've had a really nice start to the group, very open discussion, and a lot of enthusiasm for syncing up with everyone internationally. The next meeting is being hosted by Xiaomi in Beijing, and that's of interest, I think, not just in the West because it's a significant company, but also in areas like India. Xiaomi recently sold its 180th million handset in the Indian market, so significant reach there. Taiwan is running quite well. Actually, we'll be announcing this shortly, but SC Lin at Moxa, Lucian, and Florence just let me know that Taiwan is going to have a monthly meeting schedule for the work group. That puts them at a more rapid schedule than anyone else. Japan is bi-monthly. China, Korea, India are quarterly. So Taiwan's going to be a pretty intensive run. I believe that's because it's focusing highly on information transfer rapidly between companies which didn't previously interact so much. So very, very exciting. I wanted to give you a brief update on the Open Compliance Summit, which, to all intents and purposes, is also the OpenChain conference, because we had a huge amount of our community participants explaining how they were approaching challenges in the context of OpenChain. We had 2 days, 118 attendees. The conference is kept purposefully quite small to encourage open discussion. We actually had a target of 100 people, but there were quite a few last-minute requests, and we squeezed people in. 64 organizations, 10 keynotes, 18 talks, and 4 panels. One thing I really liked is that we had a good gender balance on the keynotes, 5 male, 5 female. This conference has fully evolved from being central to a Japan focus, and then later an Asia focus, into being fully international. So 69% of companies attending were international, and that was a good mix of course, people from Korea, Taiwan, China, but also significant presence from Europe and North America. Very happy with that event, and a lot happened. So at that event, Uber announced OpenChain conformance. At that event, PwC announced a case study on how third-party certification works. We had our first Vietnamese translation announced with our education guide for open source licensing. And we continued to expand our series of interviews with leaders in the open source movement around OpenChain. So during the week of our event, we released interviews from China, Japan, and Korea, which was a nice touch on the Asian front. And just today, we announced that our latest interview is Samantha from Cisco. We expect to have a few more interviews out in the next couple of weeks, and we're really glad to be telling these stories. This is something I wanted to touch base on everyone with. We want to have a lot more interviews in the next couple of weeks and months, so it would be fantastic if you're interested in being interviewed to explain how you entered open source, what you're doing in OpenChain, what motivates you, and what you think will be useful to bring the next generation into open source and governance matters. Let me know. I'm very glad to include you in our series. This series is in a response to some feedback we had that open source compliance is so frequently seen as something dry and legalistic. Yet the most vibrant and useful activity happens when people go into a room, get to know each other, and share knowledge. So we wanted to put that front and center on the website and encourage dialogue, because that's how we really see progress here. What's coming next? We complete the ISO Fast Track, hopefully in April, but first half 2020, all being well. First half and then second half, we're going to be supporting large-scale rollout of the ISO version of OpenChain. The main focus here will be in ensuring that people who might not be part of open source program offices, who might not be that educated in open source compliance, find it easy to understand and include OpenChain in their day-to-day work, particularly in areas like procurement and sales, where people will be encountering OpenChain as an ISO standard and need to be quickly supported so they can understand and deploy it fully. Second half 2020 onwards, well, this is where we work on improving the standard for the future and, of course, continuing to promote adoption. Now, when I say improving the standard for the future, of course, we don't intend to revise our ISO standard at a rapid pace. It takes years to deploy across the supply chain and through procurement. But we do want to ensure that there's a continued dialogue so that we always understand what people find useful and what people find challenging in the real world. And here I might pause and Mark, I don't know if you want to say a few words about that, because I think you covered it before, but it might be useful if people had a tiny recap about sort of how you envision looking at issues and talking through the standards future.
Well, I think you made a very good point in that it's at a position right now where it's pretty stable, and that we're going to be listening a lot. But right now, we don't anticipate big changes to the spec in the next 12 months. But still, I think it's very important to listen to the people who are implementing it and understanding what's working for them and what's more difficult for them. So that's where we're at. We basically have a very stable version of the spec. And we're really looking forward to spending a lot of time listening to people's experiences around implementing it.
And of course, one of the questions that comes up frequently is, let's say we wanted to improve language in the spec. Does that mean we have to iterate the ISO standard? And not necessarily. So there will be, of course, the ISO version of the spec on the OpenChain website, and that'll be the primary version of the spec for the foreseeable future. But meanwhile, we can clarify and potentially iterate with revisions adjacent to this via the OpenChain project. And this allows us to have drafts and so on of a potential future spec. So a good example of this is how the Office OpenXML standard iterates in ECMA and in ISO. So Microsoft's Office OpenXML standard originally went through ECMA and then became an ISO standard. Specifically, there were 4 revisions in ECMA before it was ready to become an ISO standard. And now it's an ISO standard with revision 4. Very similar to us, actually, because we had 4 revisions too. And that means that revision 4 of what's held on the ECMA side maps perfectly to the ISO standard. But at the same time, there are other revision drafts held on their website which allow them to test future iterations of the specification, to test future clarifications, and so on. So we can follow exactly the same path, particularly as we get feedback where people might be confused and so on, and we want to double check if we can find an optimal solution for that. But I mean, Mark, I think one thing that's for sure is that our spec is pretty comprehensive. So, it doesn't look like we're missing anything in terms of requirements and so on per se. It's just probably language improvements over time, I guess, for feedback.
Yeah, one thing we can do is create like an FAQ, part of the FAQ when there's some confusion around terminology until we come up with the next version of it, so that we help provide that clarification ahead of any update.
That's such a good point. And our experience was interesting with, I think, spec 1.2 to 2.0, because we had so much feedback, especially like non-native English speakers, about areas of clarification. That was a real learning experience. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to any other business and see if our work team leads have any comments, and to see if you have any comments or questions. But that's it for the recap and the grounding in where we're going next. So over to work team leads. If you have anything you'd like to add about where you want to go in 2020, please go ahead. Of course, you can also do it on one of our next calls if you prefer. Okie dokie. And for everyone else, any other business at this juncture?
Hi, Shane. It's Sammy.
Oh, hey, Sammy.
Hi. Just a quick question. Sort of, are there any plans to have another face-to-face meeting with a larger group if there is an event? I certainly in the past found these to be extremely useful in terms of workshops. So it would be useful to have that outlined sort of for the year, to give people sort of advance warning in terms of planning and attending conferences, etc., and planning for budget.
A very good point, Sammy. So the basic concept right now for the year is that we'll have 4 periods when there are moments where people will be gathering anyway for conferences. So we're looking at the Linux Foundation Member Summit, which used to be the Leadership Summit, around March is an opportunity for a meeting. Then Open Source Summit North America, Open Source Summit Europe, and the Open Compliance Summit. So that's basically once per quarter across the different continents. We have a great opportunity to get together for workshops. In addition to this, in each geography, we'll be looking at having workshops running throughout the year. So those are geographically local opportunities in Germany, North America, and across Asia to get together. I'll be sending around more details about the Leadership Summit, Open Source Summit North America, and Open Source Summit Europe. and the Open Compliance Summit. Of course, we'll opportunistically also have get-togethers at other events where people will be gathering. But those look like the four where we know most of our primary constituents are likely to be. So great point, Sammy, and I'll make sure to pass details of this early this week.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you too. So for those of you wondering about the cadence of meetings around OpenChain, things like the steering committees and indeed the board meetings, OpenChain is going to be looking to hold the board meetings, physical meetings at the 4 events I outlined. And that'll also be the opportunity for us to hold the steering committee formal meetings as well. The OpenChain Governing Board will in addition be looking at having space for calls during the periods between those events. And throughout the year, we'll be holding these first Monday and third Monday calls as before. First Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific and third Monday at 5 p.m. Pacific. However, if you have any suggestions or requirements for different meetings at different schedules, just let me know. We're at a moment in the project where there's a lot going on, and I want to make sure that everyone is accommodated. To give a quick example of this, the OpenChain Tooling Group is meeting via telephone every 2 weeks. That's over 100 participants in the Tooling Group. There's often 10 to 15 on the calls. The OpenChain Automotive Work Group tends to get together about once a quarter, though it has a mailing list as well, and that's got about 120-something participants, covering most of the automakers and Tier 1, Tier 2 suppliers. The floor is yours in the sense that if there's something else you'd like to cover, if there's something else you'd like to support, we have the infrastructure, we have the administrative support, and we can assist you with that. And indeed, it's our pleasure. Okay, so what can you expect next? The third Monday call is timed for Europe and Asia. We expect to have roughly the same summary as this call for our Asian participants, and to try to get some feedback about expectations in the East regarding where people want to go in 2020. Beyond that, if there's no other business, I'll catch you on the next First Monday call. You will see a lot of news in the next 4 weeks as we announce new members in OpenChain, we announce new conformants, and we will announce new partners, along with lots of really cool material. So it's an exciting 4 weeks ahead. Sorry, did someone have something to say?
Hi, Shane Balakrishna here.
Hi.
I'm audible? Hi. So just before the holidays, we had one tiny meeting about the training part, and then probably forming a group for the training. Is it still on? Is there any update on that?
Okay, so I believe that Alexios is working on this concept of revisiting the training material, and our status right now is that I need to coordinate with Alexios as chair of the training to get this rolling, but absolutely. Yes, I hope to bring that online, and I hope that we'll have a global training work group as well. Regarding the training course, there's discussion about having an online training course supported by Linux Foundation based off our curriculum or reference training slides. So, yep, the answer is absolutely. And if you're interested in helping actively drive that forward, let's do that. I'd love to have you at the center of this.
Yes. I'm quite interested in it, and it would be great if we can get that rolling, Professor.
Okay, I will prioritize our locking down activities there in the next week. So watch this space. I'll be emailing you after the call, so we'll get that done.
Shane, I did offer that I'm happy to show what we have done and how we've chosen to do the training within ARM. Unfortunately, I'm not able to share the actual online training itself because it contains our confidential information, but I said I wouldn't mind showing you sort of how we've chosen to do it to get ideas sort of into the group. So if you want to involve me, that would be fine.
That would be great, Sammy. And when it comes to how you show it, would you like to perhaps lock that down as the case study approach, or would you like to have another format for explaining your experience?
I think I would like to have it sort of as part of a call, so that I can just show some of the some of the slides rather than going into some of the detail. If you see what I mean.
I do, and that actually brings me neatly to a question I had for everyone about. Last year, we seemed to get quite a good reaction from having guest speakers and people having 10 minutes and so on. So I was going to suggest that we might want to lock it down as a regular feature if people find it useful. And it sounds like we might have our first victim to present.
Oh dear.
So you're up next first Monday.
I walked straight into that one, didn't I?
You did. It was an innocent mistake.
That's fine.
So we'll kick off our presentations for 2020 with ARM education, first Monday, February.
Fine.
and actually, that's really great. If that timing works for you, it's actually very good because we'll be having our German work group just a couple of days later. So that presentation will probably be able to feed into that meeting and maybe inspire people to share their experience on the German company side.
That's fine. I think I am probably going to be in Germany to give a talk at Siemens on the 5th.
Oh, we'll both be there.
Yeah, so I need to just work through the logistics, but yeah, that should be fine. That 3rd of Feb should be okay with me.
Sure, and we can always push it back onto something like the third Monday call, or indeed we can record it offline and I can play it during one of the calls as well. So completely flexible.
Okay.
Sammy, will that be in Munich for the meeting?
Nuremberg.
No, I think it's in Nuremberg.
Okay.
Yeah, and
I will reach out. And Shane, one more question. You mentioned that we are on track with the ISO standard for April 2020. Is that public information? Can I mention that?
oh yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, our current status is that the hurdle of becoming a pass submitter organization is complete. JDF is there, and we're pretty confident of becoming an ISO standard first half 2020. The fastest it'll happen is April, and we don't see any reason or hold up at this juncture. So I mean, April is a realistic target.
Great. Congratulations to this and to all the other achievements.
Well, we owe a great debt to people like David Rudin at Microsoft for guiding us through this process. And there's a gentleman, Seth Newbury, at the Joint Development Foundation, who has essentially caught all of the heavy lifting with ISO for us. So we've just had fantastic support. Okie dokie. So final call for any other business, and if not, we'll be moving offline. All right. Everyone, Happy New Year. And thank you so much for your support in 2019. I'm looking forward to working with you in 2020. Last year, we changed compliance dramatically. It's now a unified single approach around the world. And this year we have the chance to lift that beyond open source program offices and open source specialists and make sure that people in areas like procurement and sales and people in business strategic planning are fully cognizant of the advantage of good compliance and the clarity of how they do that. So we have a lot to do, but we've already accomplished great things, and I'm very confident we'll continue to do so in 2020. take care all. Speak to you on the next First Monday call, where it'll be business as usual instead of recaps. We'll be having Sammy as our guest speaker, and we'll be digging into our work team activities. I'll be asking tooling, automotive, and so on to give us updates on where they're at and where